digital world. Do you remember what it was like to laugh before 2020 hit us and things just would not stop? There was a time when there was joy to be found everywhere in the world. You just had to go out and see it. Now, not so much. Bit of a depressing way to open this episode. But if you are struggling, if you're finding it hard to laugh, given the current climate all over the world, and let's be honest, I don't blame you. I feel you 100%. Now might be the time to really delve into comedy films, something that you know that guarantees to give you a laugh 100% of the time, every time you watch it, even though you've heard the jokes over and over again, even though you could probably quote it to yourself without even having to actually turn on the movie. There are times when a classic comedy film that you love is exactly what you need to pull yourself out of a rut, to put a smile on your face, or just to remind yourself that life isn't so bad. We do have these escapisms. We just have to go out and find them. Hence, what we're doing is we're talking about this episode. We're going to go back to times of comedy films, and I'm taking particular reference to an actor. Much like a few weeks ago, maybe a couple of months ago, when I looked at Jackie Chan specifically and why I liked Jackie Chan as a person, why I like Jackie Chan films, and I outlined a few of my favorite Jackie Chan films. I thought that was a good move. Let's do that again. But let's do someone who I treasure almost as much as Jackie Chan, perhaps exactly the same, but just in different ways. Because today I want to talk about Eddie Murphy and my favorite Eddie Murphy films, why I like Eddie Murphy's comedy, what I think of Eddie Murphy then, now, for the future. A whole bunch of things to unpack here, so strap in. I hope you're a fan of Eddie Murphy. You might enjoy hearing about his movies again. Maybe if you're on the fence about him, I can alleviate your concerns or enlighten you. And if you don't like Eddie Murphy, that's unfortunate, because that's all we're going to talk about for the next 20 minutes or so. If you want to stick around and listen, you are very welcome. If you want to go, all right, goodbye. For everyone else that's still here, Eddie Murphy, right? Okay, straddle in. Let's have a chat about Eddie Murphy. Now, I have very, very fond memories of Eddie Murphy, specifically as well when I was a kid. I still do enjoy the Eddie Murphy movies now, but there was a point where I was growing up where Eddie Murphy comedies were one of my all-time favorite films, and I absolutely watched them over and over again, especially because DVDs were becoming a thing, so you could buy all sorts of movies and just pop the disc in over and over again, while away your Saturday and Sunday. Don't go out and see friends, just hang out with Eddie and his pals. When I was growing up, I was into movies, I was getting into them, but there was a lack of bravery in engaging in all sorts of film and TV. I've mentioned this, that it's still an issue that I've had until very recently. I had zeroed on specific stuff that I liked, and I tended to only focus on that stuff. In terms of movies, I was a huge Star Wars fan. I was a huge Harry Potter fan, maybe not so much now due to issues that we will not go into right now. Star Trek, Lord of the Rings, Doctor Who, very sci-fi fantasy sort of stuff. So I enjoyed the movies and the franchises that these products gave us, and I would pick up books, play games. But there were a whole world of movies out there, and I generally didn't look past what the specific stuff I was looking at. But luckily for me, I think my mother realized what potentially could be there if I just allowed myself to do that. So when birthdays and Christmases would come around and I'd ask for whatever new Doctor Who book was out or whatever Star Wars lightsaber I'd seen in the stores, nested amongst a bunch of presents would always be a movie. And it would be a movie I had not asked for, a movie I was not aware of, but there would be something in it which would just be enough to hook me to go, I'll watch it. In a lot of cases, it was the person of Eddie Murphy himself. I really enjoyed the Dr. Dolittle movies when I was a kid. I thought Eddie Murphy was very funny in that. And also the voice of Donkey on Shrek. So I was aware that he was funny, especially when he's being loud, when he's yelling, when he's freaked out by things around him. He had an infectious laugh. It was a which I seemed to appreciate. I enjoyed it. So I'd get a movie, Eddie Murphy would be on the front, and Mum would go, it's good. I remember this when I was a kid. I think you're going to like it. And I would always go, yeah, okay, cool, thank you. And then I'd move on and keep looking for whatever present I had my eye on. So in those early days, I'd pick up an Eddie Murphy film, and it would take me about a month before I finally sat down and watched it, because, set in my ways, a bit of a jerk. But when I'd watch the movie, I would be in stitches. I would be laughing so much, and then I'd put the movie over and over again, and I'd learnt the lines in a week. But it was that sort of attitude which I had to overcome when I was young to really learn about what it is to like movies and TV shows, and that there's a whole world, genre, types of films, whatever you're looking for out there. You just have to be willing to look for it. Whereas now I will gladly pick up any movie if I see something that appeals to me, if someone tells me it's good. Sometimes I'm just in the need for something new. But it wouldn't have happened if I hadn't been forced to try out those early Eddie Murphy films. We're going to talk about 3 specific ones moving forward. As I just said, what was appealing about Eddie Murphy was his loudness and his way at freaking out and using exaggerated humor, but also his ability to talk fast, essentially. In movies, he'd talk himself out of situations. He'd use his brain and his words to overcome things that us as people probably wouldn't even think we could overcome in everyday life. If you go back and watch Eddie Murphy's stand-up comedy, a lot of what made Eddie Murphy so appealing as well was a sense of vulgarity and crassness. He wasn't above swearing. He wasn't above poking fun at things which might be a bit taboo. I think in this day and age, the slapstick might not go over as well as it did in the past. There's a lot of stuff that he makes fun of, which probably doesn't fly in this day and age, which I want to say up front at the moment that I don't support anything that Eddie Murphy makes fun of that is bad by today's standards. Just because I like Eddie Murphy's comedy and I like Eddie Murphy the comedian doesn't mean I have agreed with every single thing he's ever said and every single thing he's ever done. But with a lot of things, especially with what we're doing moving forward, with things like Gone with the Wind, what Disney does in front of their really old cartoons, where they put a little warning at the front to just say that this reflected what was status quo at the time. It in no way reflects what we as Disney the corporation believe. We're not pretending we didn't make these cartoons. We're just saying they do not reflect how times have changed now, and it is not our opinion at this point. And it's the same with Eddie Murphy's stand-up for the 80s. A lot of stand-up for a lot of different comedians in different places. You look online and you see there are comedians having to apologize for what they've done in the past, which they should. They should absolutely apologize. But it should also be kept aware of that was something that was considered status normous back then. It's a bit hard. If they were doing it right now, sure, absolutely. Cancel culture, all of that. But regardless of some of the content, Eddie Murphy generally came up with stuff that was just hilariously funny. It would mainly just be him observing, in a lot of cases, the differences between other things. He'd react in an angry way. He'd swear, he'd scream, he'd shout. Very infectious, and you'd have a good laugh. So a lot of that stand-up comedy was applied to his movies. But what made his movies so good was, as I said, the ability to talk himself out of situations, the bizarre zaniness that he came across. But he was also, regardless of what character he was playing, the straight man to the wackiness around him. Even if he was playing a cartoon character, he'd be the least cartoony in the movie compared to the regular people around him. He would take on roles that were very different. They wouldn't always be the exact same thing. One minute he'd be a police officer. The next minute he would be from another country. He would be a street hustler. He'd be a homeless man. He'd be an alien from another planet. He's done a variety of stuff. He never really does the same thing over and over again, but he takes his same sort of humor and applies it to all those situations. And he manages to do it in a seamless way, in a way that I always enjoy, in a way that has me laughing constantly, even if I know the joke that I'm about to hear over and over again. As an example that I just did recently, which was that getting the presents on birthday or Christmas and trying out a film, the very first Eddie Murphy one I got was Coming to America. And let me tell you, when I saw a picture of Eddie Murphy on the front that said Coming to America, my first reaction was, okay. And then I went on. But let me tell you, Coming to America is an absolutely hilarious, funny, clever film, and definitely one of Eddie Murphy's best, if not the best. It's not my absolute favorite Eddie Murphy comedy film, but it's up there in the top 3, clearly. But it takes full advantage of Eddie Murphy's comedy and a persona as it is. Basically, what Coming to America is that he plays a prince of a far-off country, a country that does not exist. And he has an arranged marriage, which he pulls out of because he doesn't want to marry a woman he has not met. He wants to meet a woman and fall in love with her, the good way, the way that it should be done. And he eventually decides to find that woman. He has to go to America. He sees a map of Queens and goes, that's where we find our queen. So he takes his good friend Arsenio Hall, who was another fantastically funny person, and they head off to America. And they just try to find a woman for Eddie Murphy, or Akeem, as he's called in the movie. They go through a lot of trials and tribulations. They are not familiar with the customs of America, the way people are swearing at each other on the street, the way people swear at each other constantly. Eddie Murphy and Arsenio Hall both play other roles besides the main characters, where they play outlandish people that they encounter. And they're all very funny. You can absolutely tell it's Eddie Murphy, even though it's dressed up in different clothes and under different makeup. But he brings a different personality to each character he portrays. So each one is unique. And it's funny and hilarious to see those people turn up. There's also a lot of meta jokes about McDonald's, and McDowell's is a place where Akeem works at. There's references to political culture, about what it is to be a prince, having money, whether you need money. Lots of people cameo in this film. Samuel L. Jackson cameos in this film. And it's just a hilarious ride from start to finish. I would quote some of the lines that are my favorite, but they involve swearing. And when I upload my podcasts, I have to say if the content is explicit or not. And I pushed a swear word here or there. But if I start quoting some of these Eddie Murphy films, I'm probably going to get in trouble, because I don't want to put expletive, because then it limits who can listen to it. And I also don't want this to turn into a crass and vulgar podcast. But suffice it to say, the F word is used frequently and to very comedic effect. Of course, this is a good, wholesome story, regardless of the vulgarity. Eddie Murphy finds a lovely woman, and it's all about him winning her over. But he also doesn't want to tell her he's a prince, because he doesn't want people to fall in love with him for his money. He wants him to fall in love for him as a person. So it's sweet and wholesome and rude and crass. And Eddie Murphy is just hilarious. I love Coming to America. If I want people to watch an Eddie Murphy film, I probably pick this one first, because it's Eddie's show. He doesn't share the spotlight with anyone. It is specifically him. Doesn't have too much violence, doesn't have too much vulgarity, just a little bit. Enough for people to genuinely get an idea of what it is to watch a classic Eddie Murphy film from the 1980s and go, yeah, okay, cool, this is something I'd be interested in. Coming to America, highly recommend. Another good thing about Eddie Murphy is that, given the right partner, he's very good at the buddy cop genre, or at least the buddy situation comedy. Specifically, I want to talk about now is Trading Places. In a unique spin, he came up with the idea to do this episode on Friday last week. And today I got a message from one of my friends who specifically told me something about Trading Places. That's pretty cool. The wavelength that must have been on there to know to send me that information when I'm literally planning to talk about Eddie Murphy today. Very impressive. Trading Places pairs Eddie Murphy with Dan Aykroyd, and it's the classic Prince and the Pauper situation. Dan Aykroyd is a very rich Wall Street worker, but because obviously he's rich, he's arrogant, he's rude to people, he's not the nicest person in the world at all, completely takes everything he has for granted. Where Eddie Murphy is street man, living on the streets, hustling people for money. The very Eddie Murphy charm and wit he's got. He's fast talking his way to get a buck off any person that comes by. He pulls some tricks to get away from the police. Powers that be higher up than Dan Aykroyd, people who Dan Aykroyd might consider to be his mentors, decide that they want to do a bet. They're going to bet each other that if they swapped a rich person with a poor person, essentially, that either the poor person would do well in the rich position and the rich person would fall apart and have a manic breakdown in the poor situation. So they pull some strings, and by the end of it, Eddie Murphy is sitting in Dan Aykroyd's role, and Dan Aykroyd is sitting in Eddie Murphy's role. Now, it's an absolutely hilarious film. It's got all of Eddie Murphy's comedy there. Dan Aykroyd does a great job as well, especially when he's flipped and has to deal with being a poor person instead of a rich person. But it's seeing Eddie Murphy suddenly rich and seeing what he does with the money. He does with the money. That is absolutely hilarious to watch and is a treat, especially with Eddie Murphy's brand of humor. Eddie Murphy looks like he's having a ball, getting all these people, all these rich white assholes to answer to him, to throw money around and do whatever he wants. Of course, eventually people start to get on that there are strings being pulled, and Dan Aykroyd and Eddie Murphy then have to team up. Even though they don't particularly like each other, they team up to get one over on the people that are manipulating them. I will say this, in any movie where Eddie Murphy has to work with someone, he somehow manages to play off them extremely well, whether it's Dan Aykroyd Or even Robert De Niro in a little film called Showtime, which apparently a lot of people don't like, but I genuinely think it's pretty funny in a very silly, stupid sort of way. They have to hustle their way back. They have to pull a trick over their string pullers, which means dressing up as different characters and then putting on different personas. And Eddie Murphy once again goes to town on all these different roles that he can play, which is great. Trading Places, whoever I talk to, people either seem to like Coming to America more than Trading Places substantially, or the other way around. I thought a friend of mine who was really into Coming to America might like Trading Places, but he seemed to think it wasn't as good and wasn't really that interested. But Trading Places is, again, a great example of Eddie Murphy at his prime in the 1980s, showing how he can work with his comedy, especially when paired up with someone else who is a comedian, and generally just being a very likable, entertaining person to watch. But my absolute favorite Eddie Murphy movie, the one that I rewatched over and over again, that I enjoy every time I watch, even though I know the lines over and over again, is a movie called Beverly Hills Cop, which coincidentally you will be astonished to learn was originally pitched for Sylvester Stallone. I would say you're astonished to learn, but if you're a movie buff, you might probably all know this. If you don't, cool, I just gave you some new knowledge. This movie was pitched to Sylvester Stallone as a big action Stallone type movie with explosions, blood, gore, punch 'em up. I don't know what happened. I haven't looked too much into it, but I know eventually Stallone was not on the project anymore and Eddie Murphy was, and the movie completely reshaped itself around Eddie Murphy. And we got, in my opinion, the best old-timey cop show, the best Eddie Murphy comedy, the best buddy cop movie, whatever you want to call it. It's just great. Eddie Murphy plays a Detroit police officer. Detroit's depicted as a very run-down, low-key, crime-ridden sort of place. A friend of his comes to town, immediately gets murdered. Eddie has to follow the trail to Beverly Hills. Eddie plays Axel Foley in this film. If you've heard the theme Axel F on the radio, or if you've heard it butchered by the Crazy Frog for your ringtone, it's a very catchy theme and I love it. Axel goes to Beverly Hills, but Beverly Hills is all rich and proper. They don't want him there. They don't want his police antics. The Beverly Hills police are trying to send him back to Detroit. He immediately figures out who committed the crime, but what follows is him trying to overcome the hurdles of Beverly Hills itself to get justice for his friend. This is the most we see of Eddie Murphy in his fast-talking ways. He can talk his way into any rich establishment that would normally turn him away. He can talk himself out of situations with the cops. He can insult the bad guys 5 times over before he finishes the sentence. And when he needs to, the action whips out. There are guns flying, blood spewing. There's nudity in here too, sex, everything that, 80s was like, yeah, okay, cool. This is a mature audience. Kids could watch it if they want, and we don't care what they see. Eddie swears every 5 seconds in this movie, and when I watched this for a first time as a very young kid, I can tell you my parents were shocked. But it was too late, the movie had started, and I was watching it. I also really like Axel's relationship with the 2 Beverly Hills cops that he ends up working with, played by Judge Reinhold and John Ashton. They are very Beverly Hills. They are very proper police. One's set in his ways, the other is a bit of a young rookie. But eventually, when they start working together, the 3 of them become this very powerful, solid unit. And they work together in a very entertaining, enjoyable way, which I absolutely love. Especially much so in the sequel, Beverly Hills Cop 2, where you eliminate the whole bit where they have to learn to trust each other. You immediately jump into the film and they are working together. And it's absolutely entertaining. I cannot recommend Beverly Hills Cop enough. I love the action. I love the comedy. I love Eddie Murphy in it. I've loved it since the moment I saw it. I'm always happy when I hear people have watched it. But if you haven't checked out Beverly Hills Cop, I guarantee it's worth it. Give it a go. It's funny. It's violent. It's hilarious. Everything you want. Check it out. Aside from those 3, there are plenty of old Eddie Murphy films that you could check out. There are honestly tons. You could see 48 Hours, Buddy Cop with Nick Nolte. You could see The Golden Child, which is weird. I think you'll either love it or hate it. Always interested to see what people think of that one. Everything that really hammers home Eddie Murphy's comedy. Now, a lot of what people talk about Eddie Murphy, especially when I was younger growing up, was apparently how he had lost his comedy. He had lost his ability. He'd sold out, whatever you want to call it. Which you can argue for or against that. I do want to say that choosing to be in movies aimed for children is not selling out. It's taking a different path for sure, but children need movies as much as adults do. They need their own genre. And speaking as someone who enjoys children films, even now, going to see Onward animated films, whatever you want to call it, they're a good resource and I appreciate them. And I also think that in these children's movies, Eddie Murphy does a great job. I firmly enjoyed Dr. Dolittle and Dr. Dolittle 2. I'd loved Daddy Daycare when I was a kid. And I appreciated The Haunted Mansion as well, which I feel a lot of people don't, but I generally had a good time with The Haunted Mansion. And having been to Disneyland and been on the ride that it's based on, great time, absolutely. So you cannot hold Eddie Murphy to a standard of his crass, vulgar, sexy, vile humor that you have in the 80s if he's doing a movie rated G for children. You just can't. You have to accept that this is a different product and don't be an asshole about it, essentially. However, when he's not doing children's films and he is trying to do a comedy that is based on his old humor, he has sort of sold out in that regard. The last recent ones I've seen have been Nutty Professor 2 and Norbit, and they are not good films at all. They're vulgar, but not in the good way. They're using his ability to play other characters, but in a yucky way, sort of. So, in that regard, when Eddie Murphy's trying to be what he was before, yeah, you could say that he's not soaring as high as he used to be. But if there's one thing I enjoy more than anything else, I love a good comeback story. I love someone overcoming the odds and proving they still have what it takes. Or when people tell someone else that they've given up on them and they turn around and go, well, look at me go. I can do it. I didn't need you to believe in me. If you want to come back and believe me now, great. But I can be what I want to be because I believe in myself. Very mushy opinion in my opinion. My God. But it's something that I hold firm to. I love hearing that someone has risen from the ashes. In Eddie Murphy's case, I don't think he has to rise from the ashes because he's not really done anything terrible. He just needs to show his acting chops, his comedy chops. And I feel like we're having it. We're getting a resurgence. I want to end this episode by recommending on Netflix, there is a film called Dolomite Is My Name, which is a not entirely accurate, but a dramatization of blaxploitation films back in the early days, especially of the actor Rudy Ray Moore, who I only recently learned about through a variety of outlets. Those types of movies where there's a lot of overplay on that sort of nature. I got to pick my words very carefully here. Big afros, big shoes, fancy cars, catchphrases. Rudy Ray Moore was basically the king of that. He would make his own movies. He didn't need to be funded by any Hollywood product. He just said, I want to make a movie. I'm going to do it. I don't have the money for it. I don't have the ability to make this look good, but by God, I'm going to make a movie. And then I'm also going to make another 54 movies. And some of them will become cult classics. So this movie, Dolomite Is My Name, is about Rudy Ray Moore making a specific one of these movies, amongst a couple others. And Eddie Murphy plays Rudy Ray Moore. And his performance of Rudy Ray Moore is an absolute delight, a treat. He's very good in it. He's very funny. He's dramatic when he needs to be. He's not just making fart jokes and wearing fat suits. It is a genuine return to form of Eddie Murphy comedy. I absolutely enjoyed it. I thought it was great, both as a lover of film, but also as a lover of Eddie Murphy. And I think it should still be on Netflix. So jump on and give it a whirl. You can watch it not for free because you got to pay for Netflix, but you can watch it from the safety of your own home because no movie theaters are open. Alongside that, Eddie Murphy did return to host Saturday Night Live last year, and that was hilarious. He was as funny as he'd ever been. He resurrected his old characters in a good way, not in a cliche way, and I had a lot of fun watching him. And he looked like he was having a lot of fun just doing comedy again, just doing the stuff that made him famous, the stuff that he enjoyed doing back in the day. So I hope as we get to the end of the year, and if we're lucky, the movie theaters will open again, or at least this movie will be released. They are releasing a sequel for Coming to America called Coming to America, with a 2 in place of the 2. Eddie Murphy's back. Arsenio Hall's back. Jermaine Fowler is in it. He's a very good new up-and-coming actor. And it seems like it's going to be hilarious and a return to form, hopefully. So I'm excited to see this movie, and I hope the rest of you will watch Coming to America, will watch some Eddie Murphy movies, appreciate his humor, and be interested in seeing this film as well, because it's probably going to be buried under all the other films that have been pushed back to the end of the year because of the delays. It's coming out amongst the long-awaited Top Gun sequel, the adaptation of Dune by Denis Villeneuve. I think Soul might be out around that time, the new Pixar movie. So there's a lot of competition. Some movies are going to flounder where they would have normally have succeeded because they didn't have the competition. Maybe Coming to America will be pushed back. Maybe not. We'll have to see how we go. But definitely check it out when it is available one way or another, because it sounds like it'll be a great film. And definitely check out one of the many Eddie Murphy films that I've just mentioned, because I love Eddie Murphy. I love Eddie Murphy's comedy. I'm hopeful and anticipating a great Eddie Murphy comeback, and I hope you are too. And there we are. Thank you once again for tuning in, listening in, taking a stroll down memory lane with Eddie Murphy and his classics. I know I'm going to watch a few of them for sure as I think about what I'm going to do for next week, because I do know exactly what I'm going to do next week for once, because it's about time. We've done enough cycles. We can return back to a continuing series that I've been doing quite on and off. You could probably work it out if you went back and had a look at my episodes, but if not, if you can't be bothered, that's also fair. Just tune in next week and I'll give you the goss on our next step. But until then, I love and appreciate you as always. You've been spliced in later. Adios, muchachos. I'll catch you next time.